Hello everyone, my name is Kyle and I'm the first negative speaker. We're opposing the affirmative proposition that we should cancel the high-speed rail as approved in 2008 by California voters. As the affirmative side said, they referenced a New York Times article which listed budget cuts in specific areas. This article is very outdated, referencing actions taken and promises made by Governor Schwarzenegger prior to 2009. If you look at the California budget via the Department of Finance's website, spending in the critical areas that the affirmative outlined is actually increased. Since 2011, K-12 education has risen its funding 41%, while higher education has risen 31%, and health and human services has risen 42%. So of course I'm not denying that the budget crisis of 2008 happened, however California is on the rebound and it isn't experiencing the same hard times as it did prior to 2009. The affirmative also mentioned the tuition hikes in 2009. While these were set to take place, in an article from the LA Times, it outlined the student protests that happened in 2009, which ultimately led to the tuition increases of about 30% to be kind of annulled or delayed, which they haven't happened yet, but as you've seen, the tuition from 2012 per Governor Jerry Brown's request have remained frozen. The second claim that the affirmative made was that the deficit of $80 billion will hurt the state. First of all, the deficit is nowhere near $80 billion. The total projected costs until 2030 are only $68 billion, which $10 billion has already been approved via California voters in Proposition 1A. 3.3 has already been secured via federal funding, and then the approval of cap and trade, which is environmental-based money appropriation, has been approved up to $1 billion a year until 2020. So this leaves the California deficit to only what it's paid so far, the $10 billion as approved in Proposition 1A in 2008. Also, there is no guarantee or even inclination that California will cover the remaining costs of the railway. In the plan outlined by the High-Speed Rail Administration, it approved Proposition 1A funds up to $10 billion, federal grants up to $3.3 billion, and it anticipates private capital to cover $13 billion of the cost, as well as unsecured federal grants or cap and trade auction grants to fund the remainder of the project. So the approval of the $10 billion to California voters has already happened, and it is the only cost to the state of California that will come from the high-speed rail. The affirmative also stated that there are no proper funding for the high-speed rail project. This is a generalized statement, as there is no such thing as proper funding. If you look at large infrastructure projects in the past, for example, the highways in the 1950s or the waterways that bring us our water now, based in the 1920s and 30s, these were not all paid for in advance and constructed with a load of cash. These were funded in a similar manner where funds were anticipated and projections were looked at for the future rather than current times. As stated in the High-Speed Rail Administration's funding plan, Proposition 1A was the first step to conduct the initial operating segment of the rail, which goes from Merced to the San Fernando Valley, and it only cost $6 billion, which is totally paid for via Proposition 1A funds as well as federal grants. It states that with planned construction, the connections from San Diego and Sacramento will come after the rail has begun producing revenue. So once the rail starts producing money based off of the travel, that's when additional funds will come to finish the line. The affirmative also claimed that the bill was produced or approved in the year 2008, which was the year of the budget crisis. If anything, this is an indicator that the California voters believe that we do need a high-speed rail. When looking at other countries such as China, Japan, Europe, they all have very successful high-speed rail programs, and California would be the first state in the U.S. to conduct such an infrastructure project. The indication that it was approved in 2008 only serves to reaffirm the high-speed rail project in California. Lastly, the affirmative side stated that the funding that would be used on the rail can instead be used to kind of fund other areas in California. However, there is no guarantee to this because the state of California has already funded Proposition 1A. In the high-speed rail plan, there's no indication of additional funds coming from the state, as I said, so any year, the governor's budget any year after this will not have to account for, well, it'll have to account for paying off the bonds, but no additional costs will be incurred from the high-speed rail program. Thank you.